I had always wanted to camp in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. With its endless trails, thick forests, and remote locations, it seemed like the perfect place to disconnect from the world for a few days. So when I finally had the chance, I packed my gear, left my phone in the car, and set off into the wilderness. The first day was peaceful. Just me, the rustling trees, and the distant sounds of birds. I hiked about 8 miles into the backcountry and set up camp near a small creek. There were no other hikers in sight, which was exactly what I wanted. Complete solitude. By nightfall, I had a small fire going and was settling into the quiet. The sounds of nature surrounded me. Crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant rush of water. But as I sat there staring into the fire, I got this feeling. You know, the sensation that you're being watched. I shook it off. I was alone. That's why I had come out here, to be alone. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up, not because of a noise, but because of silence. The wind had stopped. The gentle babbling of the creek beside my tent was gone. Even the usual sounds of insects had vanished. The entire forest felt wrong. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the rustling of an animal in the underbrush. These were slow, deliberate steps. Human steps. I held my breath, listening. The steps stopped just outside my tent. I could hear the faint crunch of leaves as someone, or something, shifted their weight. My knife was in my backpack, just out of reach. My heart pounded as I lay there, frozen. Then, something brushed against the fabric of my tent. I nearly gasped but clamped my mouth shut. A slow, dragging sound followed. A hand? A stick? Whatever it was circling me. My breath came in short, panicked bursts. I wanted to unzip the tent and bolt, but I was terrified of what I might see. Then, as quickly as it had come, the sound stopped. No footsteps retreating. No rustling in the brush. Just silence. I didn't move for what felt like an eternity. When the sun finally rose, I unzipped my tent and stepped outside, scanning the area. Nothing looked out of place. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe the woods were just playing tricks on me. But then I saw them. Footprints. Large, deep impressions in the dirt, circling my tent. They weren't mine. Someone had been out there watching me. I packed up my camp in record time. I told myself I'd hike back to my car, but something made me stop. I was deep in the mountains, hours from my car. If someone had been watching me, what if they were still out there, waiting for me to leave the safety of my camp? Instead, I decided to hike deeper into the woods. I figured if I took a longer, less direct route back, I could shake off whoever might be following me. By midday, I started to feel better. The forest felt normal again. Just trees, birds, and the occasional distant rustle of an animal. I told myself it had just been my imagination. Maybe I had misinterpreted normal forest sounds. But then, I found something that made my stomach drop. A piece of twine, tied between 2 trees at ankle height. A tripwire. I stopped dead in my tracks, my mind racing. This wasn't a natural formation. Someone had put it there. But why? Was it a trap? A warning? I scanned the forest, my skin crawling. That's when I saw it. Another footprint partially hidden beneath some leaves. Someone had been through here recently. Someone who didn't want to be found. Then a snap of a twig. I spun around, heart hammering. Just trees. Just shadows. But I knew I wasn't alone. A rustling sound came from behind me. I turned back, and my stomach twisted into knots. Hanging from a low branch, swaying slightly, was a small, makeshift doll made of twigs and bound with twine. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Panic surged through me. I didn't think. I ran. I ran harder than I ever had in my life, lungs burning, legs aching. I didn't stop until I reached the main trail where I finally saw another hiker, a middle-aged man with a large backpack. He looked surprised as I stumbled toward him, out of breath. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, trying to compose myself. "Yeah, just trying to get back before dark." He gave me a knowing look. "Yeah, these woods get real empty at night. Best not to be out here alone." I didn't tell him what I had seen, I just hiked the rest of the way in silence, constantly checking over my shoulder. When I finally reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there, hands shaking. I had planned on spending 3 nights in the wilderness. I barely lasted one. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something much worse. Camping in Yosemite National Park had always been on my bucket list. The vast wilderness, the towering granite cliffs, and the quiet seclusion of nature called to me. So when my best friend, Eric, and I finally had the chance to take a weekend trip, we packed our gear, loaded up the car, and drove deep into the park. After several hours on the road, we reached our remote campsite, far from the usual tourist spots. The isolation was exactly what we wanted. Just us, the forest, and the open sky. We pitched our tent near a small clearing, built a fire, and spent the evening trading stories under a canopy of stars. As night settled in, the air turned crisp, and the only sounds were the distant hoots of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the wind. It was peaceful, exactly what I had imagined. But that sense of calm wouldn't last. Around midnight, I woke up to an eerie silence, then a crunch. I held my breath, listening. Another crunch. Someone, or something, was walking near our tent. My heart pounded as I turned to Eric, but he was still asleep. I stayed as still as possible, hoping it was just an animal passing through. Then, the zipper on our tent started moving. I shot up, grabbing the flashlight next to me, and pointed it toward the entrance. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice unsteady. The zipper stopped. Silence again. Eric groggily woke up, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" "Someone's outside the tent," I whispered. We sat there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, we heard footsteps moving away. I unzipped the tent and shined my flashlight outside, but whoever or whatever it was had disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, we found footprints surrounding our tent. They were human, but something was off. The prints were deep, heavy, and led only in one direction, toward our tent. There were no return tracks. We packed up and decided to move to another site, deeper into the forest. Maybe it was just a random hiker who got lost, we told ourselves. Still, we couldn't shake the uneasy feeling lingering in the air. That night, we built a bigger fire, hoping the light would keep anything, or anyone, away. But as the hours passed, we started hearing strange sounds again. Twigs snapping, rustling in the bushes. This time, Eric was just as on edge as I was. "If it's an animal, why does it feel like it's watching us?" he muttered. I didn't have an answer, but we both felt it. Around 2 a.m., we finally decided to go to sleep. We were exhausted but uneasy. I laid there, listening, waiting for something to happen. And then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard a whisper. "Are you awake?" My stomach dropped. The voice wasn't Eric's. I shot up, fumbling for my flashlight, and shined it toward Eric. He was still asleep. The whisper hadn't come from inside the tent. It had come from outside. I grabbed Eric and shook him awake. "We need to leave. Now." He didn't question me. We scrambled out of the tent, shoving our gear into our backpacks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. As we turned toward the trail leading back to our car, something caught my eye in the distance. A figure, standing just beyond the tree line. It didn't move. It didn't speak. Just stood there watching. Then a second figure appeared. Then a third. Eric saw it too. "Run!" We took off, sprinting down the trail, tripping over roots and rocks. As we ran, I heard heavy footsteps behind us, faster than before. Something or someone was chasing us. I dared a glance back. One of the figures had broken into a full sprint, closing the distance between us. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. But we didn't stop until we reached our car, gasping for breath. We yanked the doors open, threw our bags inside, and jumped in, locking the doors. I turned the ignition, hands trembling. As the headlights flickered on, they illuminated the trail behind us. Empty. No figures. No footsteps. Just the dark, silent forest. We didn't wait around. We peeled out of there, not stopping until we reached a well-lit gas station miles away. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there with us. Maybe it was a deranged hiker. Maybe it was someone who had been living in the woods, waiting for the right moment to approach. But one thing is certain, they weren't lost. They were hunting. I never intended to camp alone in Olympic National Park. My friend Jake was supposed to come with me, but he bailed last minute, leaving me with the choice of canceling or going solo. Stubbornness won out. I had the gear, the experience, and a rare weekend off. I wasn't going to waste it. I chose a remote spot deep in the forest, away from the main trails and crowded campsites. It was perfect, silent except for the distant calls of birds and the occasional rustling of branches in the wind. After setting up my tent near a small stream, I built a fire and cooked dinner, feeling completely at peace. By nightfall, the forest was pitch black. My fire crackled, casting flickering shadows against the trees. I sat there, listening to the sounds of the wilderness, letting the solitude sink in. But as the fire burned lower, something felt off. The usual sounds of the forest, crickets, rustling leaves, distant owls had stopped. It was as if the entire woods had gone silent all at once. Then I heard it, a gurgling noise, wet like something choking on liquid. My body tensed. I aimed my flashlight toward the trees, but the dense forest revealed nothing. I told myself it was probably an animal, but my gut twisted with unease. The sound was unnatural, human, but wrong. Then, another noise. This time, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled through the brush. Slow, labored. I stood up, gripping my flashlight tighter. "Hello!" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. No response. I scanned the trees, my heart pounding. Then, just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam, I saw movement. A shape, hunched over, its limbs too long, its posture unnatural. It shuddered as it dragged itself forward, a gurgling rasp echoing through the trees. I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure twitched, its head snapping toward me. Though I couldn't make out its face, I could feel its gaze. And then it let out a sound, a broken, wet gasp, like it was trying to speak through water-filled lungs. Suddenly, branches snapped loudly behind me. I whirled around, my flashlight trembling in my grip. Something else was there, just out of sight. Heavy breathing, a low shuffle. A shadow darted between the trees, moving impossibly fast. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my pack, not even bothering to douse the fire. As I took a step back, I heard twigs snapping all around me, circling. Then came the whisper, right against my ear. "You shouldn't be here." I bolted. I ran blindly through the dark, tripping over roots and rocks. My breath came in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. That horrible gurgling sound followed me, weaving through the trees like it was right behind me, closing in. Something grabbed my backpack. I screamed, twisting free, my pulse hammering as I stumbled forward. I didn't dare look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until I saw the gleam of my car's headlights reflecting off the metal. I reached my car and fumbled for my keys, my shaking hands barely able to get them into the lock. As I threw myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, I stole one last glance at the tree line. The figure stood just at the edge of the forest, its head tilted, watching. Then 2 more figures emerged behind it. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I peeled out of there, dirt kicking up behind me as I sped down the road, not stopping until I was miles away. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if it was human, but I do know one thing. It wasn't alone, and neither was I.